We're on to our third panel of today on clinical healthcare innovations, and I'd like to introduce our moderator, Professor Dan Benjamin. Professor Benjamin has joint appointments with the Geffen School of Medicine, the MD program, as well as UCLA Anderson, the MBA program. He is very, very well published in renowned journals such as Nature Genetics and Nature, and I believe he teaches the very first and the only healthcare class on precision medicine in the MBA program, which I'm excited to take next semester. So everyone, please welcome Professor Dan Benjamin.
Thank you. It's great to be here, and I'm excited to moderate this panel on discovery to delivery, the clinical healthcare continuum. We have fantastic panelists today, and so let's. Would you mind introducing yourselves?
Sure. Good afternoon. My name is Daniel O. I'm a thoracic surgeon. That means I operate on the lung, esophagus, and a little bit of the stomach. I have a little bit of a different background. I became an academic surgeon. I'm on faculty at USC. I came here under radar. In 2017, I joined Intuitive Surgical. They're based in Sunnyvale, California. They make robotic platforms for surgery and diagnostic procedures. I'm a medical officer. I'm still splitting my time between clinical practice and industry work. And at Intuitive, I'm in the medical affairs department. I'm involved with research, training, R&D, new procedures, new technology applications, regulatory pathways, and so on. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Hello. Is this on? You turned it on. There we go. Hi, I'm John Desjarlais. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at a biotech company called Xencor, which is located in Pasadena. We were founded back in the late 90s. I joined there in 2001 after getting a degree in biophysics at Hopkins and then doing a postdoc at Berkeley. And then I was, for 4 years, I was an assistant professor at Penn State. And Xencor makes therapeutic antibodies for various types of diseases. We specialize in what are called bispecific antibodies that can engage two different targets at the same time. And mostly what we focus on is recruiting T cells, the soldiers of the immune system, the best killers of the immune system, to actually attack tumor cells to hopefully help people with their cancers.
Thanks, John. I have to follow killers of the immune system. That's hard. I'm Sam Ajizian. I'm Chief Medical Officer of the Medtronic patient monitoring business. Medtronic is a large device company, 18 business units within it, making all different kinds of products, from things on the outside to things on the inside. You probably know and have come in contact with them, or your family has. The devices that we make in our group are basically critical care and anesthesia related. Pulse oximetry is probably the thing you're most familiar with, the little red light on your finger. Our product touches about 100 million patients a year, and it's a privilege to be the physician representative for all of our patients. I also, like Daniel, have come from across town education. Don't hold that against me. Did my med school at USC and my residency and chief year at CHLA. So I, like Daniel as well, came to industry unexpectedly and completely open-minded and would not look back. So I'm looking forward to talking about precision medicine, analytics, and anything else you can possibly throw at us.
I will sheepishly admit that I, too, was at USC before coming to UCLA. But I saw the light, and there's still time. Our audience today comes from a range of different backgrounds. Most are MBA students, but even among the MBAs, there are some with medical backgrounds or public health backgrounds. And I know you have a range of backgrounds, and your training doesn't necessarily line up with what you're doing today. So one of the things that I think we'd like to hear about is, what is your training and background, and what are you doing today, and what is the connection and path that got you from where you started to where you are now?
Well, I think I have a little bit of a different background than a typical MBA student because I came from MD degree and training, residency, so on. For me, I think it was getting deep expertise in one area, because that expertise is the currency that will, derive your value from. And I think that, to me, that was priority number one. So it was really becoming an expert in the surgical discipline that I'm in, understanding the technologies, the therapies, the diagnostics, the full sort of patient journey from start to finish in that specific disease like lung cancer. And then I think you get the perspective that could be valuable to companies, whether it's a startup or whether it's an established company. And today, that's kind of how my role continues, is taking that clinical knowledge that I have developed and looking at things sort of from that perspective. I still operate. I still see patients. I use competitive technologies when I need to, because I want to keep that objective lens when I go back to intuitive and say, I think this because X, Y, or Z, and it's not just like a marketing person that says this is the only way to do it or this is the best way without sort of the clinical perspective. So I'd say the takeaway for me is first getting deep expertise, whatever that field is or whatever that domain is. It's not necessarily surgical.
Yeah. Let me first address the whole USC UCLA thing. I don't have a dog in this fight, but I will say that Pasadena is an old money town, and it's kind of annoying when all the Trojans flags are lined up along the rich houses. Anyway, in terms of my background, I've got a long and varied background. I actually started as a music major, classical trombonist. And then ended up switching to a bachelor's in physics, and then ultimately decided that wasn't colorful enough for me. So I looked around and found that there are biophysics programs that would love to have a physicist that knows nothing about biology join their program. So I went to Johns Hopkins and got a biophysics degree. Learned a lot of things there. How to engineer proteins. This is where I started my protein engineering work. Moved on to a postdoc at Berkeley, continued in the protein engineering work using computer algorithms to figure out how to design and make proteins. Then ultimately found myself at Penn State as an assistant professor. Xencor got to me when I was 4 years into that process. It's probably about as low as you can get in your life. When you're a couple years, out from tenure. And I thought, well, Xencor wants to pay me a lot more money to do what I love. And my wife's also from California, not from the East Coast. So she was very supportive. So we moved to Xencor. And, how that varied background has helped in all the things we do is, particularly the physics background, really helped with developing a very quantitative way of thinking. And it turns out that, biology is actually becoming more and more quantitative as we understand the fundamentals of biology. And in fact, we interact very heavily. We actually have some in-house modelers, but we interact with other companies that use what's called quantitative systems pharmacology modeling, where they'll actually model the body and, the blood volumes and how well you penetrate into different tissues. And then they can also model how many T cells are in that tissue and how much of our antibody gets into that tissue and, how well is our antibody engaging those targets. And so my background is really, I'm not an expert in that stuff, but I can certainly ask really tough questions to those people and help inform all of that work.
Thanks. I think Daniel's comments resonated with me. A domain expert would be the way I describe it. Bringing value to a huge medical device company as a practicing physician is pretty priceless. What surprised me, and maybe not for you, Daniel, but was how little of that actually was in the boardroom daily and at the highest levels of planning in the organization. We have an army of key opinion leader physicians and other providers that help inform us, but there's not a lot of medical translation going on, to Daniel's point. Well, actually, this is the way we do it in the hospital. Or actually, I've used his device and it's better. And here's why. And here's what we can learn from it. So coming in with that domain expertise, it was foundational. And then growing in the roles really requires abdication of your domain expertise to broader things and building teams around you that can actually help you be a transformative leader. Dr. Manuel asked me at lunch, why did they hire a pediatrician in Medtronic? Like, what are you doing there? And I think the answer was, as a critical care doc, the ICU is the hub of the hospital, whether it's adult or pediatric. Stakeholders flow through there, money flows through there, service lines flow through there. So it makes sense to look at, particularly with our device landscape, what how that hub participates in our business globally. And then you end up in a place like I'm sure for you guys, where the culture is very different than an academic medical center, and it allows you to flourish. And then when you can add within that culture a single-minded dedication, whether you had R&D or whether you had regulatory, single-minded dedication to what he did this morning, rounding on patients, the patient in the bed. It's the same as when we were in the hospital. That's a beautiful thing when you can leverage all that. So I think I backed into it just by consulting and around some technology I was passionate about, and found a place that allowed me to really have a renaissance in a second career.
Great. It sounds like a common theme is that the backgrounds were helpful in your subsequent careers, but aren't necessarily all that closely related to the thing that you're doing today. One of the...
I think we just had an earthquake.
I'm glad we're in the new building.
And they don't have those at USC.
He's right. We really don't.
One of the questions that I get a lot from the MBA students here who are potentially interested in going into healthcare is that they worry about not having the background in medicine or in the underlying science. What? It's confirmed. Yes.
Thanks for the heads up.
What advice would you have for MBA students who want to go into the healthcare sector?
Well, I think it's nothing gets achieved by yourself. Obviously, that's a bit of a cliche, but it's so true. When we're in a room, whatever the topic is, whatever the meeting is about, we have people with different backgrounds, different expertise, different perspectives, and that's how we make the right decision. And like you were saying, Sam, like some of the abdication of your ego is really critical. And I think that's where actually company culture is so important. Because for me, that was probably the number one factor in kind of leaving academia, leaving medicine, and joining industry, is what is the company culture like? How are people able to perform their roles and their functions, and is it sort of horizontal? Can you speak up? Can you say, I disagree, that's not a good idea, and not fear for your career? So I think, joining a company with a culture that values sort of these different backgrounds and bringing everyone into the same room, and yet not letting one sort of dominate, is really critical.
Yeah, I'll say in my space, which is basically small biotech, there's actually a very critical role for what's called business development. So a company like Xencor, in any biotech, there's a big bootstrapping that happens over time, right? You found the company, you start developing technologies or potential drug candidates, and you just don't have the money to actually develop those yourselves, right? That could cost $1 billion. And so you need to develop partnerships with large pharmaceutical companies, right? We have partnerships with Amgen, Johnson & Johnson, Novartis, several others. But that happens through, people like myself, interacting with those companies, helping build a reputation for what we do. But also we have business colleagues, and they have a lot more expertise in the economics of those transactions, the contracts. What are the things you have to watch out for? The gotchas that a big pharma is going to try to sneak into the contract that you have to watch out and protect yourself from. I have some business colleagues at Xencor that have no background in biology. I would say, but more often than not, I see some that that do have either a bachelor's or a PhD in biology. That can be very helpful if you can understand the language of what's going on in these discussions. But there's certainly a clear role.
Yeah, for me, it's about as Daniel said, having that diverse group of people with all the different stakeholders represented, all the different functions in the business represented. That's you're there because you're the finance expert. I get that. But I think it's about, using an analogy, being conversant in a language, not fluent. I'm fluent in medicine. I can converse in molecular biology, but I'm not going to make a deal with a molecular biology company by myself. But I have enough conversational knowledge of finance that when I see a target that may be amenable to our business strategy and our growth plan and our strat plan that needs a Series A, I don't know how to do that, but I know people who do. And those are you guys. And if you can couple those skills with a place that has a mission or a plan that you really love, then that's priceless. But it is all about culture. And I know it's mission, talent, culture, strategy, execution. The C is in the middle because I think it holds everything together. And we can argue this all day long, but you can have the best other four with a bad culture and it won't matter and you'll be miserable. So really focus on looking at culture when you're entering an organization and asking the tough questions at interviews and being conversant in the language of the organization.
I really like that way of thinking about it in terms of finding the common language. And in these sorts of companies where we're trying to take a product all the way from the scientific discovery out into the market, we really need this expertise from all of these different backgrounds working together. I'm curious, in your experience, how well or poorly does that communication take place? And relatedly, what advice would you have for our students in entering into that space, maximizing their chances of success?
I think one example for me would be, at Intuitive, we're in the acute intervention space, so surgery, diagnostics through procedures. I think that, to get a good perspective, it is helpful to try to spend some time in the clinical setting. I've worked with some startups where they were developing an app for patients and so on and so forth. And, we invited them into the clinic to kind of see, with the permission of, some patients, this is what the interaction's like. This is the clipboard and the pen that they have to fill out in the waiting room to check in. And just getting that sort of firsthand experience and kind of follow that patient journey as closely as possible without, obviously having to be a patient. That I think that provides a lot of value. So I would encourage whatever space you're going into is to look for opportunities like that. I know that as a clinician, many clinicians would welcome people like yourselves to contact us and say, hey, I have this idea. What do you think? And then if the timing is right, come into the clinical space and sort of, see if it is fitting your vision of what you want to do.
Yes, I would say communication. I've noticed this over time, and it's something we try to mentor our junior folks with, but also I'm trying with my kids. The best way to put it is you can take a genius that's a horrible communicator, put them head to head against someone who's very smart and an excellent communicator, and time and again, you'll see that the excellent communicator is the one that advances more rapidly through the organization. just because communication's so critical. Everything we do is based on talking to each other. It was actually amazing when COVID hit. It was right about when Microsoft Teams started to get a toehold, and my boss, our CEO, came to me that the same day all this started to come down. He said, "Download Microsoft Teams. You got to learn how to use it now," and that helped us to survive through COVID. But but still, even having that, nothing substituted for those hallway conversations where you're just standing around kicking our ideas around, and once again, that ability to articulate. And so I would, my advice for students would be practice as much as you can. And like I tell my kids, practice isn't just like giving talks or having opportunities. It's going to social events and reaching out and just introducing yourself to somebody and having a conversation, asking them questions about what they do, what makes them tick. And this is all part of that, and it helps you grow as a person and as a communicator.
Yeah, well said, gentlemen. I would add very little to that other than I know I'm bringing intrinsic bias here as a person that likes people a lot, likes to be at the bedside, likes to lay hands on. That's not everybody's gig. So if your company does things like that, you may not be comfortable coming to the operating room with me or Daniel. It may not be okay, but there are other ways to connect to whatever that mission is and where the rubber is hitting the road that you can find suitable. I do try very hard to bring members of other teams to the hospital with me globally. It has always been an incredibly moving experience for engineers that have worked 15 years on a product and never seen it inside a patient or on a patient. It really helps to bring completeness and closure to the fact that they are making a difference. So there are different ways you can get connected there, but always be conscious of whatever that environment is, where the product lands, how it affects people's lives, and understand that as well as you can.
I think just to add to, as you were talking, I was thinking about another theme, which is to come into it with some humility. Like, we don't all go into a room knowing everything, whatever degree you have. And I think if you're just open to learn and you actually tell someone, I want to learn more, what do you recommend? Should I read this or watch this surgical video or, talk to this person or that? I think that goes a long way too, because everyone wants to work with curious people. The people we don't like to work with are the people who are complacent. And then, the ideas sort of, go in one ear and out the other. So just to add to that.
I wanted to move into the more specifics about the discovery to delivery pipeline and ask about, starting at the beginning or near the beginning, what are the kinds of challenges that you've seen in the product development life cycle?
Yeah, I think in our space, we kind of have this funnel shape of how ideas, start at the top, and then at each sort of level, we sort of trickle down until we get into the pipeline. And I think the hardest thing that I see in that stage of development is there are so many good ideas. And yet, to be successful, I think we have to focus, on the vital few. And that's a very tough process, I would say. You have engineers who spend their whole careers working on something, and you tell them this isn't going to the next phase. That's a very difficult situation. So I would say it's how you prioritize and how you focus. I think, when you try to do everything or you try to do too much, it really does dilute out, the value and the effort and what you're going to get done. So that's sort of on the development side. I think the second sort of difficult aspect is evidence generation. What's interesting to me is that we think of, in the lay press, we think of science as like an objective ones and zeros, like physics or something, like you can't defy the laws of physics. But as we saw through COVID, like science is actually very murky, and it can be a little bit gray. And how you set up a study, or even if you repeat the study, does it work? Why does it not work the second time around? That is also very tricky in the clinical science. It's not really like physics science, where it's a little bit more zeros and ones or black and white. And that, I think, is very important, because if you do have to generate evidence to get your product out into the marketplace, understanding how to do that study, so you're setting yourself up for success, but also getting the information you need, what FDA needs, and so on. So those would be the two for me.
You shouldn't have to be last all the time.
That's so considerate. Thank you. Actually, I feel like we work for the same company. So I think I echo all those thoughts. The vital few is really a strategic commitment. And what happens is the tree just keeps getting bigger. It's scope creep, right? Well, you have this great idea. Well, we don't really have the money for it, but you know what? I'm going to find something for you. And you worked on that, and the skunk works. And then all of a sudden there's 105 projects. And that's far too many for, your business, and you're struggling. So I think the tone at the top has to be commitment to those vital few, because the timelines we're talking about and the number of people that you're going to invest in and the cost of bringing these to market, they're not pharma costs, but the pharma revenue isn't there either. So the whole scale is set differently. And anything you can do to shorten that timeline, to bring better evidence, to allow adoption to happen rapidly once it's on the market, it's a lot of work, probably 10 years in advance. And you told me you pulled the chest tube this morning. He opened a package that had a chest tube in it. He probably didn't know, like I did before I came into industry, that there's markings all over that package that allow us to sell it all over the world, that tell people what it is and why it's approved. Those markings cost money to put on there. The ink has to be a certain kind of ink. What's on the chest tube itself, the markings there have to go through testing. It is exhaustive, as it should be, for things that are driving human care and safety, but it is also a minefield of potential problems that we have to navigate prospectively, right? It's fun.
Yeah, in a biotech company, I'd say that there's two huge challenges for us in terms of developing novel drug products. One is the poor predictiveness of our animal studies. You can cure a mice of a tumor. Turns out that's much easier said than done. But you at least have to check that box to decide, okay, this thing is worth exploring in humans. And sometimes that doesn't happen. Or you also do safety studies. You have to do safety studies in animal models for your therapies, and you can have a squeaky clean safety signal, and then you put it in humans, and humans are just different, and something happens. We had our IPO was actually driven by a really cool novel idea for treating asthma, targeting IgE in a very special, nifty new way. And all of our preclinical studies, it was actually beautifully well tolerated, and we put it in humans, and they got thrombocytopenia, which basically means their platelets dropped. And that's for a chronic therapy like asthma, that's a non-starter. So that drug is still alive. It was actually picked up by Nestle to explore it for food allergy. So I'm still carrying the torch for that a little bit. And then the other one for a small biotech is really just the staggering amount of competition that we get from other biotech companies and pharmaceutical companies. And that gets into the strategy component of, okay, well, what do we think is going on in the external world? Where do we find the greenfield opportunities, and let's try to point there and make sure we have enough novelty and enough competitive advantage, and keep it a secret for as long as possible, so that we have an opportunity there.
I just want to add one thing. Market opportunities also have to be looked at strategically, and you can't just blindly commit to a strat plan and ignore the market. And an example is in my business in pulse oximetry. And you may have heard that Jim Alt mentioned earlier, the red lights don't work that well on people with dark pigmentation, right? And especially low blood flow. They'll overestimate the amount of oxygen that's in the blood. That's not good, because then we might think patients are okay when they're actually not. Well, that's a glass half full for me. and for our company, because we have great performing devices, and we've been able to turn that around into a positive vector for us to take share. So you have to have some combination of commitment and agility that allows you not to march off a cliff and miss an opportunity.
So let's turn to adoption, and feel free to answer in any order. So healthcare is an industry where getting people to adopt a new technology is notoriously difficult. There's regulatory hurdles. Getting doctors to change their behavior and patients to change their behavior is incredibly challenging. How do you think about and navigate those challenges?
Yeah, sure. I'll go first. You said something about doctors. Yeah, so adoption is, we're in a pretty good field because it's, if you can make a dent in cancer, adoption's going to come naturally. But there are some challenges. For example, the type of molecules we make, which I mentioned, they're T-cell engagers. So they engage T cells and then they stick to tumor cells, and hopefully the T cells are going to kill the tumor cells. Something built into the immune system is when those T cells are killing, they also send out an alarm signal. They secrete these cytokines, and there's a thing called cytokine release syndrome that these drugs, tend to promote. Usually that's a sign, okay, the drug's actually doing something. It's probably attacking the tumor. That's why it's doing that. But it's something where we can go to any medical center, academic medical center like UCLA or MD Anderson, or places that have strong experience with these phenomenon, and they know how to treat it. They know they know how to see it coming and catch it really early, because there are ways to mitigate it with other therapies. But you have this challenge where if you want the larger market, you want that to work into the community physician space, and they may not know how to deal with that. Sometimes, as we're going through this process, the FDA is requiring, because they know this is such a intense phenomenon, you have to hospitalize the patient for 24 hours after every dose. And so that's a commercial consideration and a clinical development consideration. So you do your first set of studies, making sure you've got an effective therapy, and this is worth investing another couple $100 million in. But then you also have to think about, okay, how am I going to work my way through that so that I don't have to hospitalize a patient every time they come in for their IV?
Thanks. Adoption is the most challenging thing that I think we face as doctors in industry. I look at Daniel's business, where surgeons and their hands inside the patient gave way to a machine that's doing it for them. Now, I would have thought that the ego of the surgeon, no offense meant, you seem actually not like a surgeon, but anyway, I think that would have probably been a major adoption hurdle, right? And yet here we are 20 something years in, and it's standard of care. Of course I'm going to have robotic surgery. You're darn right I am, and we all understand. In my business, on the other side of the drape in the operating room is anesthesia. And we have a great device that monitors how deep your anesthesia level is in anesthesia. It's like a Goldilocks device. Not too much, not too little, just right. Precision medicine, personalized medicine. There are thousands of papers in the literature showing the efficacy of this device across all populations. And yet, when I walk in and ask, why don't you use this? It's the ego of the anesthesiologist, because what he hears is, I have something that does your job better. And we as an industry have to be really mindful of these kinds of assumptions, where we come in with this great tech, even if it's an obvious advantage. There are all of these cultural, specialty-specific, location-specific barriers to adoption. So frequently, when we do try to develop evidence, sometimes we put the brakes on it and go, no more evidence money. We've got enough. We need to do something different. with the way we market, with the science that's out there. And that's where I think roles as physicians in industry become really important when we sit down with our marketing colleagues and help shape that campaign and how it's going to work, and help shape what we put out at national and international meetings, to try to do something different and change those wins, those headwinds.
Yeah, I think one book, one paper come to mind on this question. The first is Jeffrey Moore's Crossing the Chasm, right? New technology adoption. You got to get across the chasm to survive, which is roughly around 15% adoption, and then you may get inertia to carry, with ongoing evidence and so on. The other body of work, the paper that I was thinking about, is there's a scientific or medical publication. I can't remember the author, but it's titled 17 Years. What is the question? And the question is, how long does it take for a practice guideline to change clinical practice? And this was a very famous paper. It was probably done in the late 90s or early 2000s, but it still holds true today. So I think in the healthcare field, you're dealing with inherently a skeptical customer base, and rightly so, because if we know that we can get patients through some kind of treatment or diagnosis safely and effectively, it's a very hard shift to change the practice of the physician, or to change how they're doing things. And I don't think it's always about ego, as a surgeon defending my specialty. I think it's really, there is genuine concern about the patient outcomes. And it's like the not rocking the boat concept. Like, yeah, okay, my complication rate for a specific procedure may be 10%. But if I adopt this new thing, what if it goes to 15%, 20%? Now, my reputation as a physician, my institution, my hospital, not to mention medical legal, issues. So those are really the headwinds, I think, that we're dealing with in the healthcare space. I think the consumable healthcare space is a little bit different, because you're asking someone to just buy something out of pocket and use it on their own. But I think in the hospital walls, it's the bar is so high, and the scrutiny is so high. People's careers can end if they change their way of doing something, and something doesn't turn out the way it should be. So.
Whether it's ego or wise conservatism, I guess we can sort that out later. But either way, how do you overcome it?
Well, a good doctor always starts an answer with "it depends," because it really does. But it depends on who your stakeholders are, who your customers are. I think we are giving way to the concept of precision medicine. And, let's say the four of us were going to have our shoulders scoped this afternoon right across the street or down wherever it is. And you're the anesthesiologist for that room. You're basically going to give all four of us the same amount of drug to get us to sleep, pretty much the same amount of drug to keep us asleep, same amount of drug in the block, and all of that.
I'm a little bigger than you. I hope I get a little bit more.
You might get a little more. You seem a little crazy, too. You might get more up front. But you might get more in the holding room. But my point is, we've been putting everyone in the same box in medicine forever. 120/80, 80/20, vital signs, 98.6. And as we get into the era of precision medicine, it's not only about genomics and tumor genomics and population genomics. It's also about our own physiologic patterns. The gentleman from Aura was talking about earlier. What does it look like? What do we look like? Put into a dashboard that a clinician can understand. Of the four of us in the operating room, Daniel might have a resting blood pressure of 85/60. It's not likely, but it's possible. If I see that when he goes to sleep, I'm going to try to make it 120 and give him all kinds of medicine he doesn't need.
He does seem very calm.
So he's most likely. But anyway, my point is getting into the era of practicing what the patient actually needs per patient. That's the exciting thing about where you're sitting now, is the revolution that's coming from sensors to cloud computing to software as a medical device to scalability across a population, and then integrating with people that make drugs like this to refine them even more so I don't get that cytokine storm when I get your drug. That's where this we hope is all going.
I think I'll just tackle a little component of this. How do you accelerate change or get people to adopt? I think in the U.S., we have a big problem with the medical legal environment. There's no one's going to debate that. And a lot of the conservatism is regarding, doctors don't want to get sued, hospitals don't want to get sued. And sort of the corollary to that is when you have a new device or new technology, is from a medical legal standpoint, especially in the era of like data and AI and machine learning, is I think physicians and people in the healthcare industry, they're a little bit paranoid about not the HIPAA part, not the confidential part of like sharing patient information. It's if I disclose or someone knows how I made a decision or can track it back to a digital footprint of how I made the decision, how am I going to defend myself if it's wrong? And I think in a certain way, a black box business model of like how medicine's been practiced for 100 years, like you go in the operating room, no one knows what's going on. The surgeon and the OR team knows, but the patient's family is not allowed in. No one's really allowed to videotape unless they're doing it for some educational purpose. And if something goes wrong, the doctor could say, oh, well, it was a complicated case. And well, what if we have data that could, we're using the data to improve your performance as a surgeon. Like maybe your wrist articulation could be better. We could give you some feedback. But if that data then shows the flip side, which is, hey, actually your wrist articulation's not that good, and you had a leak when you did the surgery, maybe it's because your wrist articulation. So it's like the data can be great when used in a productive way, but then it can come back to harm you. And I think navigating that sort of paradigm of how do you use big data, but in a way that clinicians feel comfortable, that's a very tricky space right now.
We only have a couple minutes left, so just reflecting broadly on our theme of the discovery to delivery pipeline, any final thoughts on the working in this space, what you've learned, and advice going forward?
My main message would be to whatever clinical space or problem you're trying to solve with your company or your idea, I would try to understand that sort of the patient journey in that disease or that condition from start to finish. So even if you're developing a diagnostic test for, home glucose monitoring, understand like the diabetes patient journey all the way to the end when they're getting amputations. Or if you're developing something for, intervention like a procedure, like how does the patient get diagnosed? Or is there screening for that disease? I think that kind of holistic picture really helps frame the context of where the idea is going to be valuable.
You go. My advice would be fairly specific to coming from a biotech background, but I would say the way things are moving in biotech is, learn everything you can about the immune system because it's being used very heavily for cancer therapies. Autoimmune diseases are all about the immune system, and even now, there's a big movement to take some of the cancer therapies that were developed for treating lymphoma and actually using those to treat, very serious diseases like lupus and multiple sclerosis. And then beyond that, it's too late for me, but, jump on the AI bandwagon because I think it's coming on strong.
I would say don't let the regulatory framework and secondary long timelines and cost in medical device distract you or deter you from looking at that space. We heard speakers earlier in the consumer panel that, hey, this is fun. We can kind of go get awesome data and crank out lots of devices. That's great. That's a different mission. That's more population health. When you move into the hospital and critical care spaces, it's much more refined. The stakes are very high, and the fidelity of the devices must be exquisite and leading edge. So that does bring more cost and delays to bringing it to market, but it's worth the climb. it also allows you to work in that regulatory space as a physician or a business leader to help define how they can do it better. The FDA needs people like us to help inform their processes. And along the lines of AI and software as a medical device and algorithms, that's going to be a growing regulatory field that we'll need help navigating with business leaders. So don't run to the consumer side. It's fine, but we would love to have bright young minds in the medical device world as well.
Sam, John, Dan, thank you so much for this incredible advice and insights. We really appreciate your being here today. Thank you.
Thank you.